Mm, We are live, according to Google Plus. Right. Everybody, wave hello to our audience out there.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
There we go. Everyone, I am Michael Harley from MuggleNet Fanfictions AudioFictions program, also known as Lupin for joining us on the show, and welcome to our series finale of AudioFictions. It's been 5 years. It's almost our 5-year anniversary, and this will be our final show. And to get started, I guess we'll each introduce ourselves. I'll go last, but let's go generally in alphabetical order. So, Jesse, I believe that's you first.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Jessie Lights from the AudioFictions beta boards, and my name is Jessie. I'm creative with my screen names. I've been here since the very, very, very beginning, and I'm super sad to see this go, but I have really enjoyed it, and I just can't wait to send you off with this today. So, hello.
And Jesse, what house are you in? And that's always an important one to throw out there.
Oh yes, I am in Gryffindor. Despite what Pottermore says, I am a Gryffindor. Thank you very much.
Pottermore put you in Ravenclaw, right?
It did. I never even went to the common room.
And then next would be... Well, that's right, because John is in Ravenclaw. John, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm John, or the Great Om, and I am in Ravenclaw. I've always been in Ravenclaw, and Pottermore agrees, so that makes me feel very good about it. And I was with AudioFiction since the reboot in 2010 or 2011, I don't remember. But and so I can't believe that it's already been that long. But I'm really, really excited to be able to be here with everyone, the team that we have now, and to kind of give the podcast the send off that it deserves. So I'm very excited. So I'm glad to be with all you guys.
Well, thank you, John. That's excellent. And then Olivia.
Hey guys, I'm Olivia, also known as Apollonius on the MuggleNet fanfiction beta boards, and I've also, like John, I've been here since kind of the reboot, and I'm a Hufflepuff, BT Dubs. Although Pottermore would slightly disagree, it put me in Slytherin. Although I mean, dark place. So I was in a dark place at that point, but I don't know. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Changed though, right?
Yes, that has. I'm very excited to be here and just kind of give the show a send off, and yeah.
Good. Thank you, Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
And then our newest AudioFictions member, who joined us very late in the game, but we are so grateful that she did, is Rukmini. Rukmini, please introduce yourself.
Yes, I am the newest AudioFictions member. I think I've been part of the team for 4 months now, so I'm very, very new. But it's been an amazing experience. I am also in Ravenclaw. Pottermore agrees. Every quiz I've ever taken agrees. So, no trauma there.
So we have two
abilities.
That's true.
We have 2 to 3 Ravenclaws, depending on how Jessie feels to designate herself.
Gryffindor.
But we'll say Gryffindor too, because then we have a Gryffindor.
Oh.
So, all right. Well, and unfortunately, listeners and viewers, I have to remember to say viewers because we are on video. Carol, our additional Mermuggle, who was still on the show with us all the way to the end, is unable to make it today, sadly. She is replacing somebody in a pantomime over in the UK. She's busy right now. If possibly she may join us later, we'll see. But for now, it's just going to be us. I'm sure there might be some other AudioFictions members who show up in the chat. Speaking of, if you are watching us right on YouTube, please feel free to comment or leave questions in the chat. We will see them as they come up. We're not going to address comments and questions right now during the show. We're actually going to get started with the reading here pretty soon. And then after that, we will open it up to questions, comments from you guys who are watching. And we really appreciate you being here. I guess I should say a little bit about myself. I'm Michael Harley, also known as Lupin Patronus, on the MuggleNet fanfiction beta boards. And I have been with AudioFictions like Jesse from the very beginning. And I was not originally the one in charge. I was just one of the readers when I came on. And then after Rosie left, then Jason took over. Thank you very much, Jason. Yes, and yes, you were there too. And thank you very much, Jason, for all you did. If you're listening right now or watching right now, and then after Jason stepped down, then I took over. So it's I don't know how many years ago that was. It's on the Facebook if you follow AudioFictions on Facebook. There's a timeline with all of the kind of the major development events of AudioFictions. Yeah, it's been a great 5-year run. We've had a lot of stories. We've got this is our 200th episode. It's kind of amazing. It's pretty amazing milestone for us to get to 200. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and start our stories today. Now the thing about our stories is I went searching across the archives for a story that I felt would match the ending of AudioFictions, and I couldn't quite find one that matched what I was looking for. And I also kind of wanted it to be New Year's or holiday themed, and I didn't come across many that I felt fit the show. So what I ended up deciding was that today we're actually going to read fictions that we've segments from fictions that we've already read. So it's basically the AudioFictions clip show, but it's not going to be like a stupid clip show, I don't know, like watching all those episodes of Friends that you've already seen. This is actually going to be, what we're going to do here is the person who originally read the story that we're taking an excerpt from is not going to be included in that read. They're going to get to sit back and enjoy, while the other Mermuggles who have not read that story are going to read it as a group. So you'll have a different take on the read. And I did list the first read as one that I did back in episode 167. This was a chaptered read that I did called The Secret Thoughts of Hermione Granger. To give you a little backstory on this particular story, I read it because I don't believe it was a suggested fiction on the beta boards. It was actually one that I had read for years and years over, and I loved reading aloud to friends because I think it is quite possibly one of the funniest stories on MuggleNet fanfiction. It is a diary of Hermione's thoughts, not during any particular year. It's kind of implied to be around maybe 4th or 5th year, somewhere in there, but it doesn't follow canon after a while. Although it got pretty close. It came out before book 6, and there's kind of a romance in here that kind of comes close to what happens in book 6. But this particular chapter takes place, it is chapter 4, Detention Isn't So Bad. This was from episode 167, Time Trouble, and the story is by Hermione's Revenge. And what's happening in this chapter is that Hermione and a few other students have been sent into the Forbidden Forest for another detention. And the thing that Hermione and Ron are worried about is that they have turned Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, into a duck. And and the duck might be out in the forest somewhere. They've been trying to look for it. So that's how that story goes. And this story is going to be read pretty much by everyone but me. We had Carol on Filch, so we're going to replace Carol with John. Will you read for Snape and Filch?
Gladly.
Thank you.
Some of my favorite characters traits. So.
So with that, Jesse, take it away with Chapter 4, Detention Isn't So Bad, from The Secret Thoughts of Hermione Granger.
Wow. I'll start from the beginning. My detention group included the most random collection of people. Parvati, Dennis Creevy, Goyle, Zechariah Smith, Ron, and obviously me. I couldn't imagine why we were going outside. It seemed like a rather un-Snape-ish thing for detention. However, when Snape entered the room accompanied by Filch, I had a feeling I knew what we'd be doing.
For your detention,
Snape began.
Mr. Filch here has requested that you aid him in his search for his pet. You will be going into the Forbidden Forest to look for her.
Ron and I quickly exchanged looks. It didn't seem as though Filch suspected us, but we didn't want to say anything in front of them, just in case. He did whisper to me as Snape led us out of the room.
What if we find her?
He asked. I stared at him blankly.
She's a duck, remember? We know that, but they don't. If we catch her, they'll know we had something to do with this, because there'd be no other way we would know she'd been turned into a duck.
I paused and tried to make sense of this. You're right, I eventually replied. This is not something I normally say to Ron, since when does he make sense?
If we find her, we have to change her back without anyone else noticing.
He went on. I nodded. Since when did Ron think up good logical ideas? I thought that was my job. Once we reached the edge of the forest, Filch gave us the most vague instructions I'd ever received.
Just go in there.
Normally, when a teacher or someone brings us into the Forbidden Forest, they give strict instructions because of the dangerous nature of it. Neither Filch nor Snape seemed to care for our welfare. This suited me fine, because it gave Ron and me some time to search alone. Meaning, I was alone with Ron. But we had to look for Mrs. Norris. What if we don't find her? I worried to him. He thought for a moment.
Actually, that wouldn't be that bad.
Though this was true, I had to bring up another point. If we don't find her, Filch might figure out it's our fault she's missing.
Oh well.
I was about to say something else, until I felt someone shove me to the side. Snapping my head around, I discovered that the person who pushed me was none other than Peter Pettigrew. Kidding, it was Parvati.
Have you found her yet?
She asked in an annoyingly girlish voice. Why won't she give up already? If we'd found her, I replied coolly, do you think we'd still be looking? She shot me a look. I did not comment, however, for I had spotted a duck waddling in the distance. What do you think I did? A, ran after her, screaming like a madwoman. B, sat back and watched as Ron ran after her, screaming like a madwoman or madman. C, ran with Ron as we both chased after her, screaming like mad people. Or D, thought to myself, what's a duck doing in the Forbidden Forest? Think for a moment.
Good.
Okay,
Like the
there.
little Jeopardy
Two correct
section
answers.
there.
At first, I, D, thought to myself, what's a duck doing in the Forbidden Forest? Until I came to my senses and, C, ran with Ron as we both chased after her, leaving Parvati behind, screaming like mad people. My ankle was killing me, but I didn't care. Again, I have no idea why we were screaming, though it did seem like a good idea at the time. Amazingly enough, we caught her. Well, Ron did. He did this spectacular sort of dive thing and landed on top of her, pinning her to the ground.
Change her back!
He called to me. I quickly blurted the correct spell. I have no idea why I knew what the correct spell was, and the struggling duck instantly changed into a struggling cat. I was about to tell Ron to let her go until a thought crossed my mind. Ron, we can't bring her back to Filch,
What do you mean we can't?
he demanded. Filch and Mrs. Norris have that whole secret language thing. They can communicate with each other. The man speaks cat. He stared at me blankly. Mrs. Norris will tell Filch that you turned her into a duck. He seemed to understand.
We've got to modify her memory.
Again, I was shocked by Ron's good idea.
That was
What a fun
excellent.
story.
Isn't that a fun one? I just laugh every single time. I was just thinking last night, there's such precious lines in it, because of course the rivalry in the story is between Hermione and Parvati, which Hermione's Revenge, the author was very close to Half-Blood Prince. She was off by just one friend, as far as the rivalry goes. But yeah, it is the funniest thing. I laugh at it every time. Hermione gets bitten at one point by what she calls a snapping Zibkit. And the worst things happen to her. And there's a sequel called Oh, the Insanity, The Thoughts of Hermione Granger, where Hermione and Parvati end up taking revenge on each other, and Hermione at one point ends up with antlers on her head, which was really fun to read, because Madame Pomfrey administers a potion to her that kind of addles her brains, and Parvati shows up to the hospital wing being forced to apologize by Professor McGonagall, and Hermione just screams at her, "You gave me antlers! I'm turning you into a flobberworm!" And it just developed. So that was an excellent read on that, you guys. And the reason I chose that one out of all of my reads was not only because it does have a pretty extensive cast, but also because with the stories that I chose today, I hope to show you, the viewers, who may not read audio or fan fiction very much, or listen to audio fictions frequently, there is kind of of course, a stigma around, I think, Harry Potter fan fiction especially, there's a certain kind of fan fiction that's out there that's prevalent. And I think what we've all discovered through what we've done with audio fictions and MuggleNet fan fiction is that there is a wide plethora of fan fiction out there that really serves to any kind of reader. I know personally, when I became in charge of audio fictions, I listened to almost every episode up to that time because I had a horrible, boring desk job at the time. And I was just absolutely astounded at not only the quality of the reads that we were doing, but the content of the stories. And going through them again last night, I really was just blown away at the stories that we've read and the things that have come up in each of those stories. This one in particular, as far as what I chose it for, was really the humor. It is an excellent humor story, and it also keeps, despite that it goes off into alternate universe territory, it does really keep the characters pretty close to how I think they would behave in humorous situations, and it does have a flair for Rowling's sense of humor. So that's that particular story. But the next excerpt that we have is from one of the stories that Jesse read. It was called How to Be Dead. Jesse, can you tell us a little bit about this story?
Nope.
Nope. Well, that might be because it was back all the way in episode 156.
It was quite a long time ago. I know that I absolutely had a great time reading it. I mean, as the title suggests, How to Be Dead, I mean, first off, that title totally captured me, and then I just had a really great time, especially with the first section that you chose, Michael, about what we're about to read, and trying to get into the characters and really trying to imagine how they would feel while being dead. So watching with not being able to have any actual say or input, and it was fascinating, and it was fun to read and a good read. So
yeah, and if again, the read is for How to Be Dead by Jesse is in episode 156, titled Once Upon a Time, in our archives. The story was written by Majed, and it is about Lily and James watching over Harry, presumably from above. And Jesse did do an excellent read on this. I remember it being a very striking read when I heard it. She put a lot of passion into it because it calls for a lot of high emotions throughout the story, and she met that challenge grandly, and for this read, she gets to sit back and listen as we give our interpretation of How to Be Dead by Mad Jed. And it starts with 1. Oh, that's Carol.
I was just gonna say, do we assign
Olivia,
Carol's reading?
would you like to read for Lily in this story?
Certainly, I'd love to. Okay.
Fantastic. So, 1.
Okay. He is an absolute monstrosity.
She declares, her eyes burning.
And she's even worse than him. Insipid, depraved, vindictive, selfish. There's not an ounce of good or humanity in her frail, miserable little body.
So much for the unwavering love of a sister.
He replies, sighing. He hates the couple as much as his wife, but there's no use lamenting how terrible Vernon and Petunia Dursley are. They can't do anything about it.
He had a fever.
She rants.
A fever! He was sick, a small, underweight, sick little boy, and that absolute tub of lard told him to cool off in the snow. The bloody snow, James! The snow! And now...
She continues, her eyes bulging and her hands waving about maniacally.
And now he's angry that all the neighbours are gossiping about how sick my baby is. The audacity!
She paces back and forth in agitation, but he can think of nothing to say to calm her down.
We could try smiting them as punishment.
He suggests nonchalantly.
Don't be ridiculous.
She snaps. She pauses.
You don't think that's possible, do you?
Unfortunately, no. I don't think we possess that power.
She gives an exaggerated sigh.
It's just not fair.
She says, slumping down beside him.
I died for him, and what does he get? A miserable childhood going every day feeling as if nobody loves him, and...
We love him.
He interrupts.
We can't exactly show it now, can we?
I think our dying for his life is proof.
He tells her.
First, he doesn't know we died for him. He thinks we were killed in a car crash of all outrageous notions.
Her voice trails off as she mutters something darkly.
And second...
She goes on, renewed irritation in her voice.
How is he supposed to understand that at 6 years old? Little kids need to be shown love every day, James. He deserves better than this.
I know.
He assures her, wrapping an arm around her waist as they glance down at the small boy sitting on the far end of the classroom, away from most of the other kids, coloring his paper with utmost concentration, his dark, messy hair falling into his eyes.
Don't you think I would wring that whale's neck if I could?
She leans her head onto his shoulder. It's the first time she's been still since Vermin Dursley booted her son from the house and into the snow 4 days ago. It was a miracle Mrs. Figg had found the freezing boy and knocked on the Dursleys' door, mortifying them and forcing them to take the tiny boy to the hospital. It's been 4 days, but it only seems like minutes to them.
I wish Sirius could have taken him.
She admits.
He might have been a terrible influence, but at least he would have loved him.
His face turns dark.
I still can't believe Dumbledore would be blind enough to put Sirius in Azkaban. How could he not see through Peter?
She shakes her head, and sensing her sadness, he pushes a small smile on his face.
We'll just have to wait. It'll sort itself out. It'll sort itself out eventually, eh? When our boy goes to Hogwarts, everything will be better then.
I suppose.
She murmurs, her eyes trained on little 6-year-old Harry.
Until then, we'll keep watch.
2.
And then he pushed the broom just a little bit faster. The perfect amount, really. Not too much or too little. And...
I know.
She interrupts tiredly.
I was watching too.
Yeah, but you didn't see that part because you were scratching your arm. If you had been paying attention, you would have seen how he...
Even if I hadn't been paying attention, which I was, I would have been well aware what happened, considering this is the 800th and 22nd time you've told me.
He's quiet, And she smiles in victory, glancing down to watch her 11-year-old son pass notes with Ron Weasley in Transfiguration. She likes Ron. He's a good Sirius to Harry's James.
But did you see when...
James Potter!
Oh, come on. I can't help it. He's amazing, Lily. Pure, raw talent. And the youngest player in a century. A century!
His chest puffs out proudly. She only rolls her eyes. 3. She watches Harry with soft eyes. In all honesty, he sometimes grows bored simply watching his son day in and day out. He never misses a Quidditch match or a similarly momentous event, of course, but the everyday can grow tiring to watch. It doesn't for her, though. She watches him eat and sleep, and do his homework, and play chess with his friends, and she never seems to tire of it. Her eyes never stop feasting on his face, and her attention rarely wanders from him. That night, however, she has something of an excuse.
How is he?
He asks.
Sleeping peacefully.
She answers, a soft smile playing on her lips. He nods.
Do you think that if we hadn't died, do you think all this would have happened?
He frowns.
What do you mean? Why wouldn't it?
I mean, what if we hadn't died, what if he had become a different person? What if wasn't the sort of person who'd be able to defeat a monster and riddle and...
If we'd be around, he might have been different.
He says slowly, carefully choosing each word.
But he'd still be a good person. He'd still be brave. He'd be a Gryffindor either way. No argument. And he'd still be friends with Ron Weasley, and he'd still save Ginny, and he'd still... I don't think it'd be different.
She finally tears her eyes away from Harry to look at her husband.
Do you think it would be better if it were different, though? If he didn't have to, you know...
Face off with an ancient creature in a mythical chamber to save not only his life, but that of the damsel in distress?
He suggests. She snorts.
I mean, if he didn't have the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Honestly, love, I have a feeling that would have happened either way. Kid's a hero, through and through. Like his old man, actually.
He grins encouragingly at her, and she smiles, shaking her head at him and then gazing back at their son.
Don't worry so much,
He tells her.
He's asleep, safe and sound, and so are Ron and Ginny and everybody at Hogwarts. Because of our boy. Don't worry, Lily. Be proud.
I am.
She murmurs.
But he's just a baby.
He pats her shoulder consolingly.
You know.
She finally says, her eyes alight in a way they haven't been in a long time.
I really like Ginny.
What'd you think, Jesse? Did that do it justice?
It was so good. I was getting all like flustered and everything.
Now, out of all of Jesse's reads, because Jesse, of course, was on the show along with me for the whole run, and so she had a lot of stories to choose from. I chose this one not only because I remembered how striking the original read was when I first heard it, but also because it is another great section of fan fiction that explores. There are actually a few fictions out there that explore life after death, which is a major theme, of course, in the Harry Potter series, where you go and what happens to you. And what's neat about this particular fiction as it goes on, and I highly suggest you either check out the story itself on MuggleNet Fanfiction if you haven't, or listen to it on episode 156. But it goes all the way until I think it actually goes past Deathly Hallows and them going to see Harry, and goes to the point when Harry actually passes away, I think. And it's excellently written. It goes through. It touches all of the big moments in the series and looks at it from Lily and James's perspective. And it is this quality of writing all the way up until the end. Yet another amazing thing that fan fiction can do is it kind of explore the characters that we didn't get to hear viewpoints on and only see briefly. And now our next fiction was read originally by John. It is an excerpt from Noble Souls. John, can you tell us a little bit about this fiction? Because there was something really neat that you got to do with this particular read.
Yeah, this one was a lot of fun. Well, it's a story of Gellert Grindelwald and Dumbledore going to a Muggle concert together in their, I think, 30s or 40s. They're young, they're, still friends, but things are starting to, like, develop with Grindelwald's ideology. And it was really, really interesting to me, just mostly because of what Michael was just saying. You kind of get a piece of things that are sort of outside the normal timeline of the books that we wouldn't have a chance to see otherwise. But this one in particular really intrigued me because they're at a concert, and it's a Muggle concert, and it's all real music. So when I recorded this fic, I was able to overlay the actual score of the concert they're listening to with reading it, which I found challenging because it's only there's 3 musical pieces, and they're all 17-minute works, and this is maybe 15 minutes long. So I was trying to, like, compress all of this wonderful German music to, like, just a few little snippets while still being able to hear my narration over top of it. But it was really fun. It was something that I didn't really get to do. Usually we have editors that can add extra stuff to things that when we do our special shows. But it was really fun, and I just had a good time putting it all together. And thankfully, all of the music was in the public domain, so we were able to use all of it because it's all 100 years old at least. But yeah.
And John, when you did you put the music under afterwards, or you had it playing when you recorded?
I listened to it before, so I kind of knew a little bit of what was going on. I mean, one of the pieces is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which a lot of us know from Fantasia. So that one I kind of knew already, and they're fairly common. I was familiar with at least the names of the 3, but I put it mostly in afterward because I knew it would have to be cut down so much that I just snippets here and there, like fitting them in where they needed to go. But it was a lot of fun. I highly recommend checking it out.
Yes, it sounds excellent with the music under it. We're not including the music today, but I did choose the segment where the Sorcerer's Apprentice is actually playing in the background. It's implied to be so. If you remember that section from Fantasia, viewers, play that in your head as we read along with this story. Noble Souls was written by G. Merriam, and it was originally in episode 187 titled Erised. And this is, of course, as John said, it's between Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald. All right, Jesse, you started off.
Shout out to G. Marion for her awesome works and letting us steal them throughout our entire time on AudioFictions. So,
yes, absolutely.
The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Really, Gellert? How obvious.
Gellert threw back his head and laughed, earning himself several stares from the nearby boxes.
I could not resist, my friend. I'm actually rather fond of the Goethe poem, and I'm looking forward to hearing the work.
You, fond of a Muggle poem?
Albus feigned shock.
I would have never thought it possible.
Nor I,
replied Gellert, lowering his voice as the musicians on stage began to tune.
But I find that Muggle writing is far less pretentious than Muggle music.
You wound me, Gellert,
said Albus just as softly.
Music speaks to that which words cannot express. No book or poem can ever convey the sense of love and hate, tragedy and comedy, sadness and joy that music can instill in one's heart.
Words express ideas, Albus. I prefer ideas to feelings, you know that.
Albus raised an eyebrow.
I certainly do. But Ideas are born of feelings, my friend. You cannot have one without the other.
Gellert simply nodded in acknowledgement as the orchestra below grew silent, awaiting the conductor. As they sat in companionable silence, Gellert glanced sideways at Albus, pondering his next move. Yet before he could speak, the conductor appeared to scattered applause and bowed to begin. Gellert took the opportunity to cast a charm around their booth that would allow them to speak without disturbing the audience.
Are you familiar with the overture?
He asked softly. Albus glanced at him as a single note from the trumpet sounded below.
I'm not, though I have read a bit about the opera. I'm looking forward to it, if only to see if I might reconsider Wagner.
It was a dismissal, and Gellert nodded as he turned and tried to engage himself with the performance before him. And yet he could not. Music was not his passion, as it was for the man next to him. Albus had grown up listening to his mother sing and play the harp. He enjoyed music in any shape and form, though usually in smaller chamber ensembles. Gellert knew the Liverpool Orchestra might not have been to Albus's tastes, but it was the program itself that had piqued Gellert's interest in attending that night. He might not appreciate Muggle music, but he could not deny that it often took grand ideas and created feelings that many people could relate to through the power of music. The program that night was one such program, and he hoped it might speak to Albus. The overture, the opening to an opera about ancient Rome, a favorite subject of his, soon ended, and the audience showed its appreciation. Albus nodded his head as well.
I rather like that,
he said.
It was almost light for Wagner.
Somewhat familiar with Wagner, Gellert agreed. And yet it did not resonate with him. He was not left with images of a grand empire ruled by a wise and benign emperor, guided by an elite class of senators. If he must endure the arts, he much preferred the German stories, complicated mythologies that they were. At least there was magic in those tales, gods and heroes striving for power. The conductor stepped down from the podium as the orchestra tuned for the next piece. Gellert leaned over to Albus once more.
Do you know the Goethe poem at all?
He asked. Albus nodded.
I have read it before,
he replied.
It is a fine poem.
Goethe was a wizard, you know,
Gellert said, and Albus looked at him in surprise.
He simply chose not to practice magic in order to concentrate on music. I think his feelings are clear from the poem.
His feelings of what?
Asked Albus, eyeing him curiously.
Power, of course.
Murmured Gellert.
Magical power in the hands of the wrong people.
The piece began below them, a quiet murmuring of the strings introducing the poem. Albus gave him a skeptical look.
I did not get that impression at all,
he replied. The bassoons soon entered with a clunky, comical theme.
Rather, it seems to me that it is more about knowledge.
Exactly,
said Gellert, giving him a small victory even if he disagreed.
The knowledge of how to use magic must be kept secret from those unworthy. It is too powerful a thing to have otherwise.
It is secret, and I do not disagree with you on that, as you know,
said Albus, sounding slightly annoyed.
Knowledge is quite a different thing than power.
With knowledge comes power.
Gellert was enjoying the conversation already, even though this was merely the opening. He had much more planned. He moved slightly closer, certain Albus noticed.
I'm afraid I don't see your point,
Albus whispered, now sounding more distracted than annoyed. Oh, how Gellert enjoyed his reactions.
The apprentice tried to acquire knowledge that was not his to have,
Gellert replied.
With it, he attained great power, but he abused that power to an almost disastrous outcome.
And your point?
Albus asked, moving away and deliberately trying to sound skeptical.
I lost my place. It had to happen once.
Live show, yes!
Yep. The miracle of live reading.
Oh, yes.
We must be careful with whom we share our knowledge, Albus.
said Gellert.
It could be dangerous.
Albus turned away and snorted.
You mean Muggleborns. Really, Gellert, I expected better of you than to try to use a piece of music to convince me of something you will never change my mind on.
I am merely pointing out the deeper subtext.
Gellert touched his leg, and Albus turned back to him, eyes wide for the briefest of moments.
No, you are missing the point.
Said Albus.
There is nothing inherently inferior about a Muggleborn, nor are they predisposed to any sort of lesser ability or intellect. Anyone with magical ability simply needs to be trained to it, and trained properly. You forget, Gellert. My mother was a Muggleborn, and the poem bears no prejudices as I see it.
Gellert backed off. He had not forgot. He had simply wanted to gauge his friend's thoughts once more. He suspected he would never convert his friend on the subject of Muggleborns, and in truth he was of mixed mind of it himself. Perhaps Albus was right, and magic, any magic, was good enough. It was still something they had that Muggles did not. Gellert wanted Albus on his side, wanted Albus to believe in him and have faith in his cause. It was likely worth the compromise to abandon vague prejudices he did not really believe in anyway. It occurred to him that faith and belief were feelings, but he shook it off and listened to the music below as the apprentice lost control of magic he was not prepared to wield, and disaster threatened until his master reappeared to save him. He enjoyed the piece, but more importantly, he agreed with what he saw in the poem. Some people were not meant to have knowledge, and especially power. He, on the other hand, craved both, particularly power.
Excellent, you guys. That was a very good. Rukmini, I gotta give a special props to you. Of course, this is your first live show with us,
Yes.
and I gave you a lot, and I did because the reason that I chose Rukmini is not only because I actually got to work with her prior on Alohomora. She was one of our guests, an excellent guest too, but also because she has a very beautiful, distinct voice. We had some really great auditions that came in. There were a lot of people eager to audition for the new reader role, our last reader to add on. But Rukmini's voice just stood out to me so completely. And plus, she changes her range a lot when she reads. She can read boys and girls quite excellently, which is the trait we've all had to kind of learn how to do on audio fictions. And your voice, I thought, just suited this narration really well.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that, Rukmini. And this story from John's that I chose, John, I think out of all of us took some of the biggest risks with some of the things that he read. You read some of the most interesting, unusual kind of fiction that was really, I think, that had a lot of heady, fascinating concepts that weren't always explored in Harry Potter.
Yeah. Sometimes there were I was like, I'm gonna read another really depressing or really heavy piece. So I'm like, just switch it up. But these are just too interesting to me.
And this one in particular, again, noting things about each of these fictions that really bring something unique to the world of fan fiction. There's, of course, a lot of slash fan fiction out there. Slash, of course, tends to imply not only a homosexual relationship between characters, but tends to imply characters that normally wouldn't pair up. Of course, it was revealed that Albus and Grindelwald would be canon, as Rowling stated outside of the books. And what's interesting, I think, about this approach to the relationship is that it does take into account that Gellert did not actually have romantic feelings for Albus, as was confirmed by Rowling. But that it was a one-way feeling on Dumbledore's part. And I find the writing of this particular fiction to be so delightfully unnerving in how it kind of portrays Gellert as something close to a sociopath. And his approach at reeling Dumbledore in by knowing all the things that he loves. But also kind of revealing that Gellert kind of has to concede to some of Dumbledore's viewpoints, and that is maybe where the relationship was strong, is because maybe it wasn't so, perhaps, one-sided from time to time. It's a great exploration of these two characters. The funny thing is, as far as we know, they're the only canon homosexual pairing in the Harry Potter series, but they don't get a lot of fiction written about them. So it's always a treat to see when a really great fiction about Albus and Gellert is written. It's also a great way to explore of a farther back past. We get a lot in fan fiction, of course. There was an explosion in the early 2000s of Marauders era fan fiction, thanks mainly to Order of the Phoenix and the one section we get from their past. That ended up informing a lot of Marauders era, so we got a lot of that. But people tend to not explore the farther past too much. We've dug up quite a few. We even had a few that explore the Founders era. There were some really great fictions that came out of that as well. But this is an era that's not very well explored in fan fiction, so it was great to see this particular fiction come up on the show again. That was Noble Souls, written by G. Merriam, as Jesse mentioned, one of our frequent authors that we used on the show. And it was included in episode 187 titled Erised. And so now for our next piece, and so we don't make the same mistake we did last time, we're going to have to switch Carol out again on this one.
I miss you, Carol.
We miss you very much, Carol. We are so sorry you couldn't make it to this show. If any of you ever get a chance, viewers, to watch any of our previous live shows, Carol is an absolute joy and a hoot to be around. And we'll get to one of her stories later. But she's our only British reader, authentic from the UK. So, and she's also been with the show since the beginning. Yeah, it was. We found out last night, actually, morning for her, that she wasn't going to be able to be on the show. But Carol, if you do happen to come into the audience at any point, we can still get you on. We still got a few stories to read. And again, listeners, if you are, we've seen a few comments coming through so far on the YouTube. Please feel free to comment, leave your thoughts, and on the episode. I can see you watching, and thank you so much for joining us for this final episode of AudioFictions. We're really glad to have you. A special shout out to Peter, who is one of our editors. He was our, like Rukmini, he came on very late in the game, and he has just been an absolute joy to work with. He's an excellent worker. He always takes on more work than he has to, and did a very great job editing for us. Hopefully we can keep him on MuggleNet with some other podcasts that we've got going on. I hope to keep him around because he's just an excellent editor. But for now, we're going to go into the next story, and it looks like, since we've got almost everybody on a roll in this one, let's see. So it's going to have to be either, I believe, Rukmini or Jesse's going to have to narrate this one. Would one of you ladies prefer? Oh, actually, no, Jesse will have to read it because Rukmini read this one. So, Jesse, you up to the challenge of some narration?
Okay, sight reading, literally. Okay, cool. I'm for that.
Awesome.
And me, who doesn't read with a British accent on our. No,
That's
I can.
okay.
I just choose not to. Okay.
Yes. Well, that's okay because you're narrating. The narrator doesn't necessarily have to be British, right?
Okay.
So Jesse, you'll be reading all the red, and this story is this is an excerpt from a one-shot titled "Kiss," which Rukmini read. Rukmini, I believe this was your poor Rukmini, since she came on so late. She didn't get to do a lot of reads, but I believe this was your second read, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, definitely. It was kind of a challenge for me because, as you'll see, there's a whole ton of dialogue. But I picked it because, one, it was different from my first read, which was mostly narration. But also because I love stories with great dialogue, and Half a Slug, who is the author, write some really amazing dialogue just in all of their stories. This one in particular seemed very close to canon. It kind of implies that it takes place the summer after the war, but I mean, you could see this happening at any time.
Hmm. Yeah, this is an excellent kind of back and forth between the trio. And interestingly enough, again in fan fiction, funny thing is you actually don't find that many stories about the trio, since they're pretty much covered for 7 years. If you do find stories about them, it tends to be far past their Hogwarts years. There are a few that kind of sneak into the in-between cracks that we don't see in the series, but this particular one, most, of course, fictions that take place after the Battle of Hogwarts tend to be kind of downers, which is appropriate considering the tone. But this one takes a very lighthearted tack, and it's a really fun read. Again, this is an excerpt from Kiss by Half a Slug. It was released in episode 196, titled Under the Mistletoe, and it was read by Rukmini originally. So, Jesse, look for all the red in the story and take it away.
After only about 20 minutes of uninterrupted reading time, Hermione heard the sounds of an argument coming towards her. Seeing as arguments were as likely to break out around here as the ghoul from the attic, he had taken a liking to Ron's room and wanted it back, apparently. Hermione did nothing more than continue to read. As the voices got closer, Hermione was able to establish that they belonged to Ron and Harry. One of them sounded angry, one of them horrified. Soon, the kitchen door was pushed open so hard that it hit the wall and bounced back, and Ron stormed in, followed by a pale-looking Harry.
Leave me alone, Potter!
Please, let me explain.
Please don't break up.
Hermione deadpanned, flipping the page on her book.
There's only so much whining a girl can take.
Hermione, you need to hear this.
Ron announced. Hermione did nothing but sigh and continue to read.
He's completely overreacting.
Harry tried desperately to explain, but Ron cut in.
Overreacting?
He exclaimed.
I'd like to see you take this calmly.
I would.
Replied Harry.
Because I would understand what was going on.
Going on?
Stop repeating what I say.
There is nothing going on.
Ron continued, shaking his head wildly.
This,
he said, waving between the two of them,
has always been friendship.
Ron?
No, Harry.
Interrupted Ron, holding his hand up.
It's better that you hear this now.
Harry covered his face with his hands.
Please stop talking.
To say that by this point Hermione had lost all interest in her book would be an understatement. Calmly, she replaced her bookmark and slammed the book shut, causing the two boys to jump and look at her.
All right.
She exhaled.
Harry, tell me what happened.
Well...
Harry began, nervously trying to flatten the back of his hair down.
We were playing Quidditch and Ron fell off his broom.
At this, Hermione turned to inspect Ron, who sheepishly shrugged at her before switching back to looking stonily at everything that wasn't Harry.
He didn't get up afterwards.
Harry continued.
So I flew down and tried to enervate, but he still didn't wake up. Then I noticed he wasn't breathing, so I had no idea he was just pissing around.
He tried to kiss me!
Ron yelped, pointing at Harry as though accusing him of murder. Ron waited for Hermione to either start tearing into Harry about touching her man, or trying to sensitively talk to him through this sudden change in his sexuality, but she did neither. Instead, she turned to Harry and asked the barmiest question imaginable.
Are you trained to do that?
No.
Harry replied, unfazed.
But it can't be that hard. You just...
He broke off, making pushing motions with his hand. Hermione stood up, shot Harry an angry look, made her way over to Ron, and roughly pulled his t-shirt up.
I swear, if you've broken his ribs...
She muttered, as she began gently prodding his sides with her cold hands. Ron, despite his confusion, held his t-shirt up for her to continue her apparently necessary inspection.
Harry's kisses can break ribs?
He asked weakly. God. His voice muffled by the cotton in front of his mouth.
How would I know?
Hermione replied distractedly, still moving her hands over him.
Why are my ribs a concern anyway?
Ron asked once he realized reason wasn't going to return to the conversation by itself.
Why not his mouth and what he's doing with it?
Ron glared at Harry, who looked as though he was losing the will to live.
It's CPR, Ron.
No.
Ron contradicted whatever it was Harry had just said.
It's messed up.
It's another method of restarting people's hearts.
Hermione explained.
That should only be done by those who are fully qualified to do so.
She added, giving Harry a pointed look. He had the decency to look guilty for a bit before looking at Ron apologetically.
I was trying to save your life.
Yeah, well.
Ron mumbled, twitching slightly because Hermione's hands were beginning to tickle him.
Get Hermione to do it next time. You're really not my type.
Oh man, Rukmini, how did you get through this without laughing?
Carefully. Also, but I didn't have John flailing around in front of me.
That's true. Oh man, did we do justice to that story? You think, Rukmini?
Yes, definitely.
Oh man, that's a fun one. Rukmini did
Props
some.
to Half a Slug. That was great.
Yes, props. That is a hilarious story. Rukmini did, despite that she only was able to do a few reads on the show, she did some excellent ones. And this is kind of the funny one that's sandwiched between. She's actually got one fairly serious one that she started off with, and one that kind of oscillates between seriousness and hilarity in concept. And I chose this one just because it's so well written, and the humor just gets me every time. When I first heard it, I was just idly listening to the episode, and I wasn't intending to listen all the way through to the story because I didn't have time. But then I actually ended up staying and listening through to it because it was just the funniest thing. I was just as interested in her as Hermione was when they started explaining what was going on. So yeah, that was a great read. And again, as we don't see a lot in fan fiction, Harry, Ron, and Hermione's younger years aren't often explored since they are covered in the stories so much that people tend not to examine Ron, Harry, and Hermione very often in fan fiction. But I think there is still a lot to mine from the trio's relationship, and I think there's kind of the forgotten element that they definitely kept their dynamic post-Hogwarts. We see it a little bit in Deathly Hallows in the epilogue, but I think a lot of people find the epilogue offensive in itself, and they kind of pretend that it didn't happen. So that's Rowling's greatest fan fiction, some people would say. But yeah, it's fun to see this fiction where Harry, Ron, and Hermione, their dynamic is kept so incredibly intact almost immediately after their Hogwarts years. Again, the things you can find if you explore MuggleNet fan fiction thoroughly and really go looking for some stories that you think will suit you. Again, what we're trying to do here with this final series finale of AudioFictions is show you guys that even whether you love fan fiction or not, there's stories out there for everybody. I think a big issue for us throughout the run of AudioFictions was the concern that people kind of brushed fan fiction off because of the stigmas around it in the community, kind of thinking it was all Hermione lustily ripped off her bodice, which she would never be wearing. And there's plenty of that out there. There's plenty of that, and some of it's actually pretty well written if you go looking for it. But there's definitely, again, a stigma around fan fiction that I think people shy away from it because they think that it's all going to be that, and it is not all that. And again, some of that is actually very well written and tastefully written. But there's a lot of stories out there about lots of different things in the world of Harry Potter. There are even stories that actually amazingly take place on the fringes of the wizarding world. Sometimes don't even have anything to do with the characters from the story and are completely about OCs, as we call them in the community, or original characters. So, with that, we go into our next story. This was I thought this was an excellent fiction that was read by Olivia, and it is called Funny Business. This is an excerpt from that. This is actually the final section of this story. And Olivia, please tell us a little bit about this story.
So, I'm not actually sure where I found this. I think it might have been a featured story or something like that. But when I read it, I was just so drawn to it because of the kind of the reflection on Harry's younger years. Because I mean, it's sort of a gap of roughly 10 years between between him getting dropped off on the doorstep and then getting Hagrid popping up, and so I don't know, this was sort of just a way to kind of elaborate on, rather than just saying, and those 10 years were a completely crap time, and it also yeah. And it also, I think, kind of shows, Petunia's struggle with her feelings for her sister, and kind of just the ways that, she still has to kind of balance, words.
Was the balance perhaps her conflicting opinions on Lily?
Exactly. Lily, and then being, having to take care of Lily's son indefinitely, kind of just thrust upon her, and just that whole business. So.
Yeah. It's the interesting thing actually about this fiction is that it kind of foresaw something that's coming up. Rowling is she's not writing it, but she's participating in it. There is going to be a stage play in the West End in London about Harry's in-between years at the Dursleys, which I'm sure will be a hoot and a half. But really, after hearing this fiction and reading this fiction, I would hope that there are elements like this in it. Kind of these. What's so clever about this fiction? Funny Business was written by a great user named Chocolate in the Library, and what's great about it is it definitely takes that tack of Harry having these abilities that keep kind of popping up very inconveniently, but it ties it into his past really well. And it doesn't give. Really, what's great about it is it doesn't give away any more than probably would have been given away to Harry at that point. And it really, in the end, it doesn't really strike Harry what the whole thing means. The preface, of course, is that Harry has found in the past a necklace up in the attic of the Dursleys' home, and the attic is not a place that he is allowed to go. And he's been banned by Petunia, and he's found a lot of things in there, and he finds a necklace that he presumes belonged to his mother, and the necklace somehow, for some reason, keeps trying to get to him, despite all of Aunt Petunia's efforts to ensure that doesn't happen. And this section is the final piece of Funny Business by Chocolate in the Library. This was in episode 177, titled Wattlebird. It was originally read by Olivia, or Apollonius. And John, take it away.
Exhausted with hunger and self-pity, Harry dozed for a couple of hours. But when he woke in the middle of the night, he couldn't stop thinking about the necklace and Dudley. Monday morning, Aunt Petunia would hand Dudley a bundle of old clothes and junk jewellery to take to school. Dudley would hold the delicate lily in his foul, sweaty hands. If all went well, it would be lumped in with all the other jumbled donations and sold to some stranger. Of course, the necklace would probably never make it to school. Now that Dudley knew just how much it meant to Harry, he would no doubt drop it in the nearest dustbin. That last thought propelled Harry up, out of bed, and out of the cupboard. He wasn't sure exactly what he was planning to do. Surely he wasn't thinking of stealing into Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon's bedroom, with them lying right there. Well, maybe he would figure something out by the time he got there. Although he would have to think fast. He was about to reach the top of the stairs. Just as he did, he heard a noise from behind their door, a sort of soft thunk, like a fairly heavy object falling onto the thick carpet of the bedroom. Frozen, he waited, wondering if the noise meant that one or the other of them was awake and about to come through the door and catch him for about the 10th time in that one day. But instead of hearing his aunt or uncle, he heard something stranger, a sort of skittering noise, like the claws of a small animal scraping against the inside of the bedroom door. Then, in the dim light from the street lamp, he saw a glimmer of something peeking under the doorway. A glint of silver, a tiny green jewel flashing at him like an eye. His mouth fell open as first the lily-shaped pendant, and then the chain, started to inch under the doorway, winding its way toward him like a snake. He took a step backwards, stumbling and almost falling down the stairway. And then the door did jerk open, and the hallway flooded with light. Aunt Petunia stood in the doorway, her hand frozen on the hall light switch as she gaped at the necklace, still inching its way slowly across the floor toward Harry.
Petunia, darling,
came Uncle Vernon's sleepy voice from the still dark bedroom.
Does anything matter?
Oh, no, everything's fine, dear. Go back to sleep.
Her trance broken, she grabbed for the door handle and pulled the door shut, so that she and Harry were alone in the hall. The necklace lay on the floor between them. In the bright light from the electric bulb, its weird movement from a moment before seemed like a dream. It just lay there, like any other piece of junk would, somehow looking duller now. Harry felt his throat tightening and wondered if it had all been a dream. Aunt Petunia bent down and touched the necklace, gingerly at first, then grabbing it firmly and straightening up. She studied Harry for a moment, her lips tight.
This has to stop, Harry. Immediately.
I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't...
Stop it.
He stopped. Something in her voice sounded different. She took a deep breath.
I know what you think, but this necklace did not belong to your mother.
He seemed to be having trouble choking out the words, which Harry could understand. He tried to remember her ever talking directly to him about his parents.
The necklace has always belonged to me. However, your mother did give it to me.
Now her voice took on a really strange tone, with a softness to it that Harry had never heard before. Well, not when she was talking to him, anyway.
I had no intention whatsoever of giving it to a jumble sale. Do you understand?
He didn't, but like a robot, he nodded.
I'm locking it up in my jewelry box.
Her mouth twisted into a grimace.
Assuming Vernon can glue the box back together after it leapt onto the floor and broke a while ago. So I'll expect there to be no more funny business about this necklace, do you understand?
And again, Harry nodded. For a moment after she went back to the bedroom, Harry just stood there. But finally he went back to bed, somehow feeling better. At least the necklace was going to stay here. It would be safe, and he would know where it was. But regardless of what he'd said to Aunt Petunia, he didn't understand. He didn't understand at all.
Very good, you guys. That's excellent. What did you think, Olivia, about reading that?
Oh my gosh, that was delightful. I loved it.
I hope we're all enjoying getting to be on the other side of our stories and getting to listen to them.
It's an
It is.
interesting feeling because like it kind of flashes you back to like thinking about like your little notes for yourself as you were reading the story, and yeah.
Yeah, because we definitely each approach our stories that we read differently and
Oh yeah,
uniquely.
definitely.
Um, and again, this particular fiction, uh, this came out before there was the announcement that there was going to be a stage play about Harry's life, and again, I hope that the stage play takes some cues from some fan fictions out there. 'Cause this is just I think this is so cleverly written in that it informs not only Harry's character in new ways, but also Aunt Petunia, who I feel kind of unfortunately gets the short end of the stick development wise, as the series goes on. But but another thing to mention, of course, in addition to um, Rowling's the play that Rowling is supervising but not writing, she has written some great stuff on Pottermore. If you viewers and listeners haven't checked it out yet, there recently, in the last release, Half-Blood Prince was released over the holidays, and she wrote some amazing stuff about Malfoy and about a few tidbits about Snape and Inferi and zombies and vampires and what was kind of the hope I think with Pottermore, and actually what I was surprised to not see happening a lot in the MuggleNet fanfiction community, was that Pottermore I think is actually a really great starting place for people to get ideas for fanfiction. Because while I think a lot of people have taken the view that Pottermore completely takes away openings in the Harry Potter world, I think actually it's been giving more openings than anything. While Rowling touches upon things that haven't been included in the series, she doesn't always go into full detail about the particular moments, and she's not writing new stories. She's writing new kind of informative pieces. There's a lot that you could take with Draco's new biography, Umbridge's biography, even such things, and we actually expanded upon this with one of our contests in the past when we did our Hogwarts Express contest. She wrote about the origins of the Hogwarts Express and how it got brought over to Hogsmeade and how that even happened. And even though she kind of mentions it, she doesn't go into detail about what happened, and they could easily write a story about that. So Pottermore's, had a lot of great gifts to put forth. And speaking of great gifts, we are about to go into our last fiction here. We're actually kind of right on time with where I wanted to be. This is working out great. Live show, everybody. We never know what's going to happen. And of course, sadly, the person who read this fiction is not here with us right now. But I had to choose this fiction because I think it is quite possibly, and of course this is up for opinion, but personally I think this is quite possibly one of the greatest fictions we ever had read on the show. The sheer amount of effort that went into it, and not only into the writing of this fiction clearly, but into the reading of it by Carol, was just absolutely phenomenal. Let's see, before we go on, I'm having technical difficulties on my end. And I want to make sure that can you guys see me well? Am I paused? Am I moving?
You're frozen.
Okay, because I'm paused on my end, so I'm trying to I want to make sure that I don't screw this story up because it's so good. So before we go into this story, maybe we can have you guys vamp for just a little bit for me. And we talked about this a little bit in episode 199. But if you guys could maybe just talk briefly about some of the fictions that you guys read in the past and some of your favorites. So we'll do that before we head into the last fiction here.
Well, I'll start. I read this one fiction, and forgive me, I'm forgetting who the author is, but it was called You're Me? And it's where Hermione and Ron switch bodies on accident. And it's just kind of like the daily struggle of Ron just kind of, it was really funny and a little, like, third years, and Ron will sometimes look down and be like, oh my, okay. And she's like, don't you dare touch anything. Don't you dare do anything. And then one time, Ron's body, which has Hermione in it, has to go to the bathroom. So it was just hilarious. Me trying to read them saying things to each other and one being like, don't touch anything, don't look, don't, ah. It was just hilarious. And I couldn't read the story. I had to like calm myself down because I was laughing so hard, and I think that was back when I was editing my own fiction. So I was like, thank goodness nobody could like hear these like oh my gods and oh geez like that I kept saying, kept reading it and going, I don't want to say that, because it was so funny and walking the line. It was great.
And I actually remember reading that one. I think I was in like middle school, and
Yes.
during one of my tech classes, I had like finished with the curriculum, so I just went online and read fan fiction. And yeah, it's just like it was one of those stories like at that time, like reading it in a classroom was just like mortifying for me.
Yes.
And so like I can only imagine like what reading it out loud, for something that would be like not broadcast exactly, but like released to a large audience must have just been like entertaining beyond belief.
Yeah. I kept thinking like, oh gosh, what are people going to think of me for reading this out loud and choosing this fiction to read it? But it was just too funny to pass up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That helps. It either helps or hurts sometimes reading things out loud. Either you read it out loud and like, I can't believe I just said that, or I can't believe I have to read whatever is going on, and it's just sort of mortifying. And then on the other hand, sometimes it's that much better reading it out loud and like actually getting to do it. And like
definitely.
Rukmini mentioned before, me like waving around, like I do that a lot sometimes when I'm just recording, and at least in this show you can actually see that. When it's just me sitting at my table doing it, it's a little bit different, but it like gets you into it, and it is really easy on certain fictions, sucked in. And
actually really, John, going off of that, I think most everyone knows by now that I have a cat, and whenever I'm reading fictions where I have to scream or get really upset, inevitably she comes in here and she's like, what's wrong? Why are you yelling? And she'll like come up to me, and her way of getting you to stop being upset is the only thing she can think to do. Instead of like cuddling or like purring, she comes up and she bites you. So many times I've been recording and my cat will come up and I'll be yelling, especially the one that we just read today where Lily Potter is going, insipid, depraved, and I was really getting into it. I took like 5 different times I read that paragraph out loud because I wanted to get the emotion right. And my cat comes in here and she just goes, "Arr!" and bites me, and I did it to her because I was really into it. So I'm like, "Wah!" and I start screaming, and I have to stop, and I go, I'm sorry, editors who are going to listen to this, my cat just bit me.
Well, and like kind of tying into all that, like when I first started reading on the show, I was 17, and I hadn't finished, high school yet, and so I was just like still super embarrassed to read out, things like kissing or like any kind of swearing. Basically, was just like no. So yeah, but like it's kind of been entertaining to me, like as I get older and more experienced in the ways of the world, that stuff just comes more naturally, and it's like I still blush when I read kissing scenes, but yeah, it's not as bad. I can like say the words,
pull it together for the edit. Well, it is weird. When you're reading it, it's one thing, but to be like narrating it, you're like, when you read it on the page, you're just like, okay, they kissed or whatever. Like if it's like romantic, like, oh, he like touched her like hand or whatever. But when you're like reading it out loud, it's like, it's just as a different, because you don't ever really physically say what you're doing or what people do. So it's like kind of weird. We're like, okay, this is, how long is this? How many? Like, this is like, the better part of a page, which takes like 10 seconds to read, but when you're saying it, it's like,
it takes a lifetime.
It is something to get used to. That's one of the things I have to get.
Is my grandma listening right now? Because I sure hope she's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I live with 2 other people in college. I'm a senior in college, and I'm really glad that I was home and not at school for my last fiction that I read, which was, oh goodness, I've completely forgotten its name, but it's about Petunia and Hestia Jones. And there's this point where Petunia has this dream, and she's screaming, "I love you, Sir Jones!" And, doing that at school would have been kind of awkward.
Yeah. Like,
Your
I
RA comes knocking at the door.